Hello and welcome to the Successful Garden Design Show. In this episode we're visiting one of my favourite gardens in the UK. We're at Hestercombe in Taunton, Somerset. Now there's something about this garden that often gets overlooked, so in this episode we're going to set the record straight. And there is going to be some controversy in this show because I visited a very famous English garden that I was really disappointed with and really didn't think it was worth the entrance fee. But I did find a lesser known garden not that far away from it that I think you should go and visit instead. If you're frustrated your garden doesn't look as beautiful as it could, even though you've purchased lots of lovely plants, then help is at hand. Plants are not enough. You have to have a good design layout. And when you combine design with the beauty of plants, that's when the magic really happens. It's our mission here at Successful Garden Design to show you how to do it, and it's much easier than you may think. I'm Rachel Matthews and I've been a professional international garden designer for over 25 years, and I teach garden design online. Okay, so our first garden is quite an old one. It was first constructed in 1904. And it was part of the main feature of this garden is the rill, which was restored in 1990. So you've probably seen photographs of it because it is such a famous garden. Now, I'm not normally drawn to formal layouts, but I must admit there's just something so special about this garden. I'm really drawn to it and I absolutely love it. I think it's the way the hard landscaping materials have been used to create the backbone for the design, and you can see the very famous rill there that was restored. There's just such a simple elegance about this garden, and the planting is glorious. And the main thing that I wanted to set the record straight on this garden is you often hear people refer to it as a Jekyll garden, and the planting was indeed done by Gertrude Jekyll and she's done an amazing job. But what gets me is often no one mentions the actual designer, which was Edwin Lutyens, Sir Edwin Lutyens, and without the design layout the planting wouldn't look anywhere near as good as it does. So let's take a closer look at the design. As we come down the steps here you can see that the lawns are interlinked and they are set out by a stone edging here which defines the shape and therefore defines the planting borders, so it gives it a structure. And the attention to detail, the walling, is got very beautiful stone and it has things growing out of the crevices and things tumbling over, which links the hard landscaping with the soft landscaping of the plants. So the design here is very simple, and the shapes are laid out by using this stone paving to great effect because it divides up the space, but it also draws the eye to the focal points and creates lots of interest within the garden. And all of these lawn shapes go back to steps. So there's a lot of symmetry within the design. And if you look at the attention to detail within the hard landscaping, you can see that that is what makes this garden glorious. Yes, the planting is absolutely fantastic, and I don't want to take anything away from what Gertrude Jekyll has done, but look at this amazing detail that's in all of this landscape, this hard landscaping, all these surfaces and textures and shapes. They're just incredible, and that is what really gives the garden the structure. And this is the mistake that most people make because planting always gets the attention, and you can see this pergola walk, this is a very famous one, but it isn't. The planting is the icing on the cake. The design actually takes care of 60 to 70% of how the garden will look, and the materials you choose and the way that you do the layout. So I'll show you a garden in a little bit further down this episode where there's too much attention on planting, and you can see it's not nearly as good as this garden. So it's always a synergy of plants and the landscaping, but you've got to start with that landscape design first. You can't create a garden like this with just plants alone. So we were rather spoilt with the design layout in Hestercombe because Sir Edwin Lutyens was an architect more than a garden designer. So he really knew about strong lines and lining things up properly. And you can see the focal point in this garden. It perfectly lines up with everything. Now that's probably because he put it down on paper, so he knew everything was perfectly mathematically worked out. Unfortunately, that didn't occur in all the gardens I visited. This one in Borde Hill in West Sussex, you can see here they haven't got this central focal point. It's not lined up, it's to one side. Now things like that drive me crazy. To have a formal garden and have the paths all over the place and things not line up properly, it looks jarring when you're in it. And one wonders if this garden evolved and then it was like, oh, whoops, things don't quite line up. Oh, we'll just put a bit of a wiggle in there. And it just doesn't work or look right. And they did have a plan on display, and you can see here that this pergola here, this doesn't line up with the view from the centre, and they could have just easily moved things down and had it all line up properly. And you can see from the aerial photograph it just doesn't look right. Now admittedly they normally get away with it because you can see here on this photograph, normally there's all these lovely nepetas, I think it is, and roses flowering, although it could be lavender, and that takes your eye away from the fact things don't line up properly. So you really do need to think about how your design works as a whole unit and put it down on paper so things like this don't happen, because when you're in the garden it just feels so wrong. And other gardens we've visited, it's again similar thing. You can see the path here doesn't line up with the door of this hut, and it just slightly off, and it's just so annoying. As was this chap that got his bottom into every single photograph I took. He just would not budge either. But anyway, him aside, it is important to line things up and plan properly. But one thing they did get right at Borde Hill, well, more or less, was the formal garden. They've got an Italian garden, and for the most part that did line up pretty well. You can see the steps right in the centre here to the focal point at the top, and they'd got a nice feature in the middle of it, and it did look stunning. So with the countryside, etc., it looked great. But they didn't line up the central water feature with the path. You can see they put the geranium pot, but the whole focal point of that formal pond was this cascade water feature, and again it didn't line up with the path. So they're little pernickety things, I know, but you do notice it, and they are important for a garden to really feel good. If you want to make sure you don't make these easy kind of errors in your garden and want to learn about design, head on over to successfulgardendesign.com/free classes, where you can attend one of our free fast track garden design classes. There'll be more details about that at the end of today's show. So I do seem to be having a bit of a downer on gardens at the moment, but this garden is Hidcote Manor, and I visited this about 20 odd years ago, maybe 25 years ago, and I found it to be a really inspiring garden. I love the colour schemes, I love the layout, the way it was maintained, everything. So coming back, it had just lost its edge. It just didn't look anywhere near as good as I'd remembered. And most of it was, I think they changed a lot of the plants, but it just didn't have the clarity that it used to have. I remember this tropical bit of the garden was spectacular. I remember spending ages and ages photographing it. And then I go back and it's like, yeah. And the whole garden just, I think there'd been far too much emphasis put on the planting. And even when they did have the tightly clipped yew hedges, it wasn't quite enough. This was the one bit of the garden that did look good, but everything else was a bit disappointing. And bearing in mind that we'd paid over £23 to get the two of us into the garden, and my non-gardening companion sneakily videoed what she had to say about it.
Just, you can pan over to there, you'll see the only interest there is the beautiful lavender, Pravoskia, whatever it is, and the rest of it, quite honestly, if you can get past the people, it's overgrown. But you can take a look down there.
Okay,
so you can barely even see the waterway that it's supposed to be so pretty. It's just completely and utterly overgrown.
So I don't think she was impressed either. But anyway, the thing about Hidcote is there is a design. I searched online for the plan of it, and you can see here a lot of thought has gone into the planning. So even with the design, why isn't this garden looking good? Well, a lot of it, I think, is because the planting, there's too much emphasis on the plants, and you can see here where they've got the grid, there isn't enough design going on within each of the planting spaces. So therefore, when the planting gets messy, and it was end of August when we went, so gardens do go over at that time of year. But even so, we visited it like 2 days after we'd been to Hestercombe, so it still should have looked good, and it didn't, because the planting, it's actually very difficult to get a planting scheme that looks superb for many months of the year. It takes a lot of skill. So if you have a good design layout in place, it's almost like cheating, because that will hold the garden together visually, even when some of the plants aren't looking at their best. Obviously, it still helps if you've got a good structure and clarity within your planting scheme, but a good design does do the bulk of the heavy lifting. So as far as Hidcote goes, if you're in the area and you're a National Trust member and can get in for free, sure, it's worth popping in to see it. But if you're going to make a special trip and you've got to pay to get in all honesty, I wouldn't bother. Okay, so my recommendation, if you're in Gloucestershire, is to go and see the Burton House Garden. And it's a really lovely garden. It's not as large as Hidcote, and it's about half the price, but it's well worth it because the gardens are beautifully maintained and they're just a little bit different. They do interesting things with topiary and colour. They've got white borders and pink borders and hot borders, or not just even white borders, they've actually got a white garden that you walk through, and the whole thing is white, silvers and greens, and lots of interest and intrigue with the garden as you wander around. You don't know what's going to be around each corner. And as I say, I love what they've done just with simple box topiary. You can see here this spiral they've done of them. But the way the planting borders, they've got such clarity, in comparison to how Hidcote looked. I was just over the moon when we got here, and it actually rained for an hour and we still waited. They've got a lovely tea room in an old barn that we had ourselves a lovely cream tea, so we waited to see the rest of the garden. So that's how good it was. And as I say, they've done well with the planting, the colour schemes and the clipped hedging. It all just works seamlessly. So we had a lovely afternoon out despite the torrential rain. Though I look forward to going back there next time I'm in the area. So I do hope you found this episode inspiring and that you're going to do amazing things with your garden. Now, if you'd like some help with that, head on over to successfulgardendesign.com/free classes, where you can attend one of our free fast track garden design web classes, where I walk you through all the steps you need to know in order to be able to successfully design your garden. So that's successfulgardendesign.com/free classes. So I look forward to seeing you in one of our free trainings soon. Take care.